Across the sterilized, climate-controlled cabin of the diplomatic shuttle sat a man winding frayed, blood-stiffened canvas around his knuckles. This was not a combat transport. The vessel was a hegemony royal conveyance carrying the sole Terran representative to Celestia. That crude preparation, Vaughn, 8 observed from the opposite bulkhead, made no logical sense for a wedding gala. The bureaucrat's 4-segmented eyes flicked down to the official manifest on his datapad. Beneath Kalen's primary file, listing him as a low-tier circuit fighter from the Dustlands, sat a heavily encrypted subdirectory titled Aegis Protocol. The human did not seem to notice the scrutiny. Kalen tucked the loose end of the wrap beneath his palm and tapped 2 fingers against his worn pilot's flight vest. A faint double-click echoed from the sub-circuit comlink embedded inside. Vaughn, 8 logged the gesture as an involuntary nervous tick, a grounding mechanism for a fragile species facing interstellar royalty. What the hegemony unleashed that day wasn't a champion. I wish I could say the archives warned us. Stay close. Arrived the diplomatic disaster exactly as predicted. Beneath the soaring crystal arches of the Grand Hall, Archon Valerius did not offer a toast to the newly bonded union. Instead, the Archon raised a 400-year-old ceremonial goblet and invoked the Champion's Clause. Silence dropped over the 300 assembled species like a weighted net. The political maneuver was brutal in its simplicity. To maintain their newly recognized status within the hegemony, the Terran delegation had to answer the challenge in the ancient combat rings. Failure meant immediate revocation of all sovereign rights. Complete geopolitical ruin. Yet, when Vaughn, 8 looked at his charge, the human's pulse monitor showed 0 elevation. Kalen quietly adjusted the cuffs of his borrowed jacket, his expression devoid of shock. It was the face of a man who had not walked into a trap, but a destination. 12 standard hours later, the archive repository hummed with the low vibration of cooling fans. Kalen stood before a holographic projection of his ultimate opponent. Thrum, the Vorshai champion, was a monument of chitin and muscle. Historical combat footage showed the giant's rigid movements, punctuated by a rhythmic mandible clicking before a lethal strike. Vaughn, 8 approached the terminal, his own antennae twitching with sympathetic anxiety. He noted the secondary screen Kalen had pulled up. It was not a tactical breakdown of Vorshai anatomy. It was a dense medical scan of a human right knee, spiderwebbed with severe fracture lines. The bureaucrat felt a sudden pang of pity. Your biological framework is hopelessly fragile, Vaughn, 8 stated, assuming the human was calculating when his old trauma would give out under Thrum's mass. The Vorshai exoskeleton cannot be shattered by blunt force. What is your survival protocol? Kalen did not look away from the glowing bone fragments. I'm just going to bend it the wrong way. The physiological impossibility of that statement caused Von 8's translator node to stall. An exoskeleton did not bend. It either held absolute shape or killed whatever tried to move it. Before the handler could demand clarification, the heavy iron doors chimed with the first arena summons. 36 champions waited below. The man from the Dustlands cracked his neck and walked toward the descending platform. The ringing silence of the stadium pressed against the observation glass. 12 consecutive bouts. 2 grueling days. Vaughn, 8 gripped the console edge as the final match commenced. Thrum stepped onto the sands, a walking fortress of unbreakable chitin, casting a massive shadow over the battered Terran. Kalen calmly spat a dark clot of blood onto the pristine Celestian floor. He adjusted his breathing rhythm with 2 sharp inhales, rolling his shoulders back as if clocking into a mundane factory shift. Click, click. The Vorshai mandibles snapped together in their rhythmic precursor to violence. Thrum surged forward, bringing down a massive, rigid limb. That absolute strike, Kalen did not attempt to dodge. He took the impact directly on his right side, forcing all the kinetic energy down into his scarred leg. A sharp, wet crack echoed, registering across the arena audio sensors. Von 8's datapad flared crimson. The handler stared at the telemetry, his prior assumption dissolving into pure horror. Kalen had not been lamenting his fragile biology in the archives. The knee failed exactly along the old fracture lines, but the human medical anomaly of bone calcification had made the surrounding tissue far denser than original growth. He had calculated the precise breaking point. Humans did not merely fix their injuries. They weaponized their trauma into biological traps. Using the momentum of the collapse, the Terran dropped beneath the alien's guard. Kalen wrapped his bruised arms around the Vorshai's primary leg strut. Exoskeletons could not twist. They held absolute shape. Against that unyielding rigidity, the human applied continuous, agonizing lateral pressure. High in the royal box, Archon Valerius watched his political dominance evaporate. His pale hand trembled violently. Slipping from his grip, the 400-year-old ceremonial hegemony goblet plummeted to the floor, splashing dark wine across the polished stone. The myth of absolute imperial control shattered with the glass. A deafening metallic shriek filled the stadium as the giant's joint buckled inward. Thrum collapsed hard onto one knee. Kalen reached up and tapped his flight vest twice. That same double click from the shuttle broadcasted across the arena's open frequency. Aegis of the Lost recognized. A sterile, automated voice declared. Vaughn. 8 understood the geopolitical catastrophe instantly. The human had never cared about the Terran delegation's basic survival. He had fought 36 champions solely to invoke the forgotten secondary provision, claiming an independent title that bound him to answer distress calls the Empire ignored. He had stolen their monopoly on salvation. Vaughn. 8 felt a profound, freezing dread settle in his primary stomach. The bout is over, Kalen wheezed, releasing his tight grip on the alien's buckling leg. Thrum remained frozen on the sand, waiting for the executioner's strike. Reaching downward through the floating dust, the Terran offered his open palm instead. The frayed, blood-stiffened canvas of the knuckle wraps hung inches from the giant's unblinking eyes. Overhead, the stadium floodlights reflected off the undisturbed pool of spilled wine.